Imagine how our life would be simpler if we could speak all the languages in the world. There are thousands of languages, but have you ever thought how many languages you could learn? Being bilingual or even a polyglot is a goal that many people would like to achieve. Language is an indispensable tool which allows us to communicate with each other and live our lives. Human language is not only for communicating with the outside world, but also with ourselves. Over half the world's population is bilingual. It's estimated that there are around 6,000 languages in the world today, but there are only 150 countries to fit them all into. Of course, it's also true that they don't all have the same numerical importance. 1,000 million people, close to a quarter of the world's population, speak Chinese, whilst other languages only have a handful of speakers. According to several studies, an important factor for classifying different types of bilingualism within a framework is age. It's convenient to distinguish four ages at which individuals become bilingual: infancy, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. Early bilingualism. Infant means unable to speak, so the baby goes directly from not speaking to speaking two languages. This age group involves the simultaneous acquisition of two languages. Bilingual infants generally start speaking slightly later than monolinguals, but at an age that it is perfectly acceptable in a monolingual child. Consecutive and late bilingualism. In this case, there is a successive acquisition of two languages. The second language is learned after the acquisition of the mother tongue. After 3 years, it's consecutive. After 6 years, it's late. Adolescent bilingualism. It refers to people who have become bilingual after puberty. Adult bilingualism. It's used for people who have become bilingual after their teens. This is often associated with a non-native accent. Now we talk about bilingualism and biculturalism, sharing two cultures. Culture means our customs, our habits, our beliefs and values, our feelings. Several cultural aspects are assimilated simply by living in a society, and they are linked to the language in some way. According to some studies of bilingualism, to undertake this path, it's never too early or too late to begin. The starting point is to have realistic expectations. The most popular methods are the OPAL, one person, one language. That is to say that each parent will always and only speak one language with his child. In most cases, it means that a parent will speak his L1 with his child. It's one of the most used techniques, but for a child to learn a language effectively, he needs to hear it daily and for a considerable time frame. MLAH, minority language at home, that is to say that all family members speak the minority language at home and the majority language outside the home. This technique is effective to promote their minority language, but on the other hand, the child could learn the dominant language more slowly compared to his peers. Bilingualism has numerous and clear advantages, so now we try to highlight also some less tangible advantages of being bilingual. Bilingualism promotes understanding, tolerance, and open-mindedness towards other peoples and customs. It expands their perspectives of the world and allows you to feel at ease in various situations with different people. Therefore, anyone who masters 2 or more languages can show the flexibility of his mind. Bilingualism awakes the curiosity and the originality of thought, and at last, it enriches the personality, which, through 2 languages, becomes the result of 2 cultures and 2 ways of being. Once a bilingual described himself as endowed with extra ears and eyes, and with his second language he had 2 windows opened on the world. The brain is part of the central nervous system, and it performs fundamental functions that contribute to an organism's life and behavior. It houses the higher nerve center responsible for coordinating sensory and motor systems in the body. Neurolinguistics is the science that studies the relationship between human language and the brain working. Thanks to the introduction of neuroimaging techniques, sophisticated research has been carried out to try to understand how the brain is able to organize the bilingual process. If a baby doesn't hear talking and he doesn't start speaking, he will not be able to learn to think. The brain cannot evolve if there has been no contact with the language since the early days. The ability of adults to think depends on the acquisition of the language from their childhood. Furthermore, language is not only the means to communicate a thought, but it's mainly the means by which the thought exists. The development of human intelligence and the acquisition of language takes place according to a biological calendar, which means when the brain is ready. The initial period of language acquisition should be ended around 9 years old, and until then the brain shows a particular flexibility and strengthens some linguistic mechanisms. In fact, during this period, a child is able to learn 2 or 3 additional languages. A child learns languages by imitation. Even adults learn by imitating, if they are surrounded by a different linguistic environment, but in more complicated. Adults generally are not able to hear the correct sound of words because they are extremely linked to their mother tongue, which organizes their comprehension. We use the term code switching to indicate a person who speaks 2 idioms correctly and mixes these 2 languages in order to be more effective in communication, or simply to express an elaborate message. Code switching shows not only the ability to switch from one language to another, but above all the deactivation of one language during linguistic communication. It represents a fundamental bilingual ability. We use the term code mixing to indicate the tendency of bilinguals to switch languages within the same thought trajectory. Bilingual children don't code mix because of cognitive confusion or lack of grammar knowledge. By contrast, this ability needs a grammar knowledge in both languages. Any human being is able to learn more than one language if exposed to necessary linguistic stimuli, with also the ability to activate or deactivate those languages so as not to confuse them. Although translators often are not aware of their talent, the ability of the human brain to translate from one language to another is extremely sophisticated. In fact, if the human brain is the most complex object in the universe, and if human language is the most evolved and specialized activity of the brain, as a consequence, translation is one of the most complex operations in the universe. The term interlinguistic translation shows the translation of sentences between 2 different languages, and it allows you to get a synonym in another language. Any human being should potentially be able to become bilingual, but not necessarily a translator. So, bilingualism is not a sufficient requirement to become a translator or an interpreter. Interpreting and translation demand a high language knowledge and cultural awareness. Have you ever sat down in an interpreter's booth, put on the headphones and tried to interpret the incoming speech? It's very difficult, and being bilingual is not enough. No sooner you start than problems arise. As you are outputting the first sentence, the second one is already coming, but you had not paid enough attention to it. You remember its beginning, but not its ending. It's a very quick passage, which consists of translating ideas of sense of completion, not word by word. Professional interpreters must have all necessary linguistic and cognitive requirements to switch from one language to the other, both simultaneously and in sequence. Here is why they are considered special bilinguals. Now I conclude with a famous quotation by François Gourjon. It takes more than having 2 hands to be a good pianist. It takes more than knowing two languages to be a good translator or interpreter.